Hey guys, Chad here with Midlife Classic Cars. We're back doing our interviews, and we have our first one with Preston Lerner, the author of Shelby American. This is going to be another just great interview. I'm really excited about the topics we talk about. We talk about his other books he's written, uh, the history of Shelby and the people behind Shelby and all that type of stuff. So it's going to be a great one. As always, remember, we ship all of our books in boxes so you can come to you not damaged, and we make sure we put them in a plastic bag so they can't get affected by moisture. So, and also if you can, check us out on YouTube, Facebook, on our website, on our blog posts, and please subscribe and like and leave comments. It keeps me motivated to keep going. Anyway, let's get into the interview. Hey guys, let's get going with this interview with Preston Lerner. How's it going, Preston? Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today to do an interview. Really excited. This is my first interview back from, we got robbed a while back, and I lost all my electronics, and I was really enjoying doing these. And so I'm really excited about get back going, and you're my first author to get back. So really appreciate you taking the time to do this with me today.
Well, Chad, thanks for having me on. I love what you're doing. Any bookstore I love, but especially a bookstore that specializes in racing and cars.
Yeah. So tell me, you're the author of Shelby American, the Renegades who built the cars, won the races, and lived the legend. What made you write this book?
So this year is the 60th anniversary of the Cobra, the creation of the Cobra, and also Shelby American, which was the company that built the Cobra. Mm-hmm. And late last year, I got a call from my editors at Haggerty, and they wanted to do a piece on the upcoming 60th anniversary of exactly that stuff. So I ended up doing a story for them, and I did all this research, and I'd previously written a book about the Ford GT, the factory effort from the 60s. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, this could be I've got a lot of stuff done here. Maybe there's a book in this. The only problem was, as you well know, because you sell a lot of these books, is there's a ton of Shelby books out there already. Mm-hmm. And so I had to really decide whether it made sense to do one because so much material has been covered already, but it seemed to me that there was, an opportunity to sort of tell some stories that hadn't been told before and talk to people who hadn't been talked to before. So
that's awesome. And one thing I will point out, this book it's a reading book. I mean, there's a lot of stories in it, and I agree with you. There's a lot of Shelby books out there, but for me personally, a lot of them are photo books. They beautiful photos with a little bit of captions. This is actually stories and stuff. Correct?
Yeah, and that's one of the things is people also forget. There's a lot of Shelby books out there. A lot of them are really good. So I want to, people can go elsewhere and find some really great books by, Dave Friedman and Homer and so on and so forth. But a lot of them, the same material gets covered in these books, and the stories usually focus on Shelby, obviously, and some of his top lieutenants. But these cars were built by hundreds of people who actually did the hands-on labor and raced them, and so I wanted to sort of give them a little time in the spotlight. And so, of course, a lot of people are gone now because it's so long ago, but I talked to whoever was left who I could get a hold of and sort of got their take on what happened there back in the 60s during the glory days.
And how'd you find those people?
Well, there's a group, a guy named Bob Shaw, who's done a really great job he has an alumni, essentially a Shelby American Alumni Association. So I had a copy of the directory. But sadly, even though the directory was only about 5 or 6 years out of date, even between that time and this year, a whole bunch of people have died or been incapacitated. Because again, we're talking about 1960s. It's a long time ago. So, but I was able to get in touch with a lot of people, and unfortunately, I've spoken to a lot of the people, many over the years, interviewed them for other stories, and there's a lot of material out there. There were transcripts that have been put together by Dave Friedman, and also the Shelby American Automobile Club has done a really great job of interviewing a lot of the lesser known names and transcribing those interviews. And they gave me access to that material, which was great.
So it was very easy for you to get material for this book. It wasn't that much of a struggle.
Well, it was a little bit of a struggle.
Yeah, it was.
Well, the real challenge was the time crunch. We really wanted to get the book out this year because this is the 60th anniversary. So, 60 is not the greatest anniversary, but it's better than the 61st anniversary. So it ended up being, I really kind of, I've done several books in the past, and I'm pretty familiar with the process, but I really underestimated how much work it was going to be required.
Yeah.
And the deadline was brutal. It was I really wasn't anticipating having to work as hard as I did to get this done in time.
Now, are you retired? Are you still working? Do you have a job that you have to fit this in to write these, or are you retired now?
Yeah, I'm a freelance writer. I mean,
Freelance
that's been
runner.
I started as a newspaper reporter many, many years ago, and I've been writing. I mean, I wrote for a long time for Automobile Magazine and Road and Track. Now I do a lot of work for Hagerty and Motorsport over in the UK, and I still do that. I mean, that's really my bread and butter. I mean, books, especially racing books, are a pretty niche audience,
Hmm.
and so they're not completely a labor of love. I mean, but there's a labor of love element to it that there isn't, in
Yeah.
writing magazine stories.
So what in writing this book, what was your favorite chapter to write or the story that you told in the book?
Well, I think the creations of the first chapter is actually really fun because the creation story of the Cobra is
Hmm.
just such a great story. I mean, because you have Shelby himself, who was such a charismatic, larger than life figure, and you have him creating this Anglo-American sports car. Which it's a very funny story how he manages to get the chassis out of AC based upon Ford engines, which he doesn't have, and he manages to get
Hmm.
Ford engines out of Ford on the basis of AC chassis that he doesn't own. But he managed to put this together kind of out of thin air, and he creates what was clearly the most badass sports car of its age.
Yeah.
Um, and it was done with a really small group. I mean, you think of now how you build a new car, it's blueprints and engineering drawings and CAD and this and that. And it was a handful of guys hammering stuff out of metal and putting it together, and they did it, a couple of months.
It really sounds like he had that motto, fake it till you make it. You know?
Yeah, he was. I mean, Shelby was a brilliant man in many ways. I mean, he was smart and he was cunning and a visionary, but he did so much on the force of his personality. He didn't have money. He came from East Texas. He was not wealthy, and he managed to get rides in sports cars that he didn't own, and he managed to
Hmm.
put together a team when he didn't have any money. And it never would have happened without Carroll Shelby. I mean, he was really
Yeah.
the central piece of the story.
And you were saying before we started this that he was the first professional race team, or how did you describe that?
Yeah, I would say, IndyCar racing was different. The Indy cars were already at
Mhm.
that time that was a professional series. People did it for money. Sports car racing really began in the 50s, and it was really an amateur sport. There were a handful of teams like Cunningham and the Scarab, which I wrote a book about. I mean, they were doing things on a professional level. I mean, they had pro people building things, but they weren't in it to make money. It wasn't a profit making
Mhm.
proposition. So Shelby American was the first team to actually make a business out of racing here in the United States in sports car racing. And that's what really changed it from being this elite kind of no crowds and no crowding kind of sport for a handful of people with these little sporty cars from Europe. And it kind of turned it into a more of a mass market sport. And, that's what led to, prototype racing we have today really started thanks to what was going on there in the 60s.
Wow. So there's a story. I've grown up in the Austin Healey Club of America. My father had Healeys and we have Austin Healeys. And there was always a story that Carroll Shelby spoke to Donald Healey about, putting the Ford engine in the Healey, but they came to the conclusion that it just wouldn't fit. The weight of the Healey was not correct. Have you heard anything about that? Because I've always wondered if that was an old wives' tale or if there was any truth to that story.
I've never heard that he approached Healey with the Ford motor, but I mean, he definitely did approach Healey. He was interested in doing a sports car
Hmm.
from when he got first started in the early 50s. And so he investigated a lot of different things, and Healey was one of them. And he hired an engineer to actually draw him up some plans for a tube frame car, and that never happened. And he actually he got 3 Corvettes out of Chevrolet and took them to Scaglietti over in Modena, and they built those three Corvettes. Um, into I'm sorry, three Corvettes that look like Ferraris. I mean, but
Yeah.
then Arco Stuntov got wind of it, and he said no, no mas with that thing. He didn't want that happening. So yeah, Shelby definitely looked in a lot of different possibilities, but it was the Ford engine becoming available in '62, and then the AC losing the Bristol motor for
Hmm.
the Ace. That's really what put things together, I think.
Yeah, I've been around several AC. I just can't get over how lightweight and the chassis are, how small they. I mean, it seems like there's nothing to those cars. It really was a perfect fit for that engine, and I can't imagine when they first did it how rowdy that car had have been to drive.
Yeah, the weird thing, so it started, so the first engine's the 221, eventually the 289 is the
Mhm.
famous one, and then the 427. But so it's a 221, and it was really not much of an engine. I mean, it was better than like the Bristol 6, from
Mhm.
the war, but um, and I think the first time he tested the car, I believe, was with in England, was with a 221, and they hadn't shaken down the chassis, and I think it was probably really a little bit disappointing because when they got to the States, it was a 260, and they did a ton of work to get that thing to work properly, and which they did, but it took a while, and I think I think it was clearly it's like the Brits kind of feel like the Cobra is an AC with an American engine and Ford's money. But
Mhm.
the Shelby people really think of it. The AC was just the beginning. It was sort of like a blank canvas that Shelby created a masterpiece on. And I'm sort of
Yeah.
more of the second camp because he did so much work. They did so much work on that car that there's not too much of the original ace left in it.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of modern racing and just seeing, like, let's say F1 in this current season, how much development has to go into a car. And it's interesting to see like that was the same thing. They had a car, but it wasn't perfect out the get go, and how much development they had to put in to make that car competitive.
Yeah, and they did a ton of yeah, not they did a ton of development, on that, and of course they developed the Sunbeam Tiger was originally developed there, but
Hmm.
and then I know you're a fan of endurance racing. When they got to the GT program, I mean, that development program from 64 to 67, I mean, that was unlike anything that had ever been done in history until that time. I mean, now it's, as you say, in Formula One, they're doing updates every week.
Yeah, yeah.
That wasn't done back in the 60s. And so, when they would go out testing, every month they have a giant test, and not just Ford would be there and Shelby American, but they'd have Goodyear would be there and Lockheed would be there
Hmm.
with the brakes. And that stuff was that was brand new back then. They really pioneered all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that type of stuff is just amazing to me. There's another book, The Unfair Advantage, that goes into all that, the fuel towers and the different ideas. I think that's a lot of times why I love this era of racing more than current racing, is just because people are literally just figuring things out for the first time, and everything. And that's what's amazing to me. The aerodynamics and them working on that and figuring that out, how to make the cars slicker. I mean, that type of stuff is pretty amazing. Um,
It's funny. Actually, that's My two favorite books on racing are The Unfair Advantage and then the Dust and the Glory, the Leo Levine book,
Yeah,
which
yeah, yeah, both of
both
those are great. Un
both cover this stuff. So
Yeah, I was very fortunate as a kid. My father, when we were first started doing the business, we were at a car show and we got The Unfair Advantage in, and he's like, "Just so you know, this is what's considered one of the top all-time automotive books." And I think I read it in a night and a half. Like, it was one of those books, like, I literally could not put down and read it all the way through. There's great stories in that one.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So obviously in the picture of your book here is Shelby and Ken Miles. Do you really think like the movie really helped with Shelby's legacy? Do you think that I think it's definitely helped with Ken Miles. Honestly, I think a lot of people did not realize who Ken Miles was until the movie. I know the car fans of Shelby did, but not everybody did. And now he's sitting here on the cover of your book. How did you feel about the movie? How did you feel about Ken Miles and their relationship?
I mean, I think the movie was good in the respect that it raised the profile of racing in general, and
Hmm.
especially of this era. I mean, I really didn't like the movie as a movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't like the racing scenes just seem ridiculous. I mean, to me, and it's not so much I know it's not meant to be a true story, so they can do whatever they want,
Hmm.
change things, and that's fine. That's their own. I mean, I get it. That's Hollywood.
Yeah.
I thought it was a little unfortunate. I actually thought that Christian Bale was great as Ken Miles, and he was very much as I imagined Miles to be. I didn't really see Matt Damon as Carroll Shelby. Didn't seem to me like a larger than life Texan. And I
Yeah.
particularly disliked the one I really hated though was they had Phil Remington as kind of this dweeby character, which was so weird because Remington was like the the star of that. He was the foundation of that team, and I don't know why they turned him into this kind of.
Yeah, I agree with that because I didn't know if they did that because of the actors or what, but I agree. I feel like some of the personalities in that movie were not correct. And then you're right. A lot of it was made for movies like Shelby flying the airplane. That never happened, from what I understand. And there's a lot of things like that. It didn't seem, talked about a lot of people about the Rush movie,
Uh,
and the Hunt and Lauda movie, and a lot of
right.
people felt there was more things correct and in that movie than the Shelby one.
I agree with that. I thought Ron Howard tried to make it a little bit more realistic. I mean, I think racing it's a tough sell for a general interest
Yeah.
audience that don't really understand it. That's why you always see guys shift to pass somebody. You see them shifting into high gear again.
Yeah, I love that.
So,
I think Days of Thunder messed that up. You know, when he was like, "I'm dropping the hammers," like, there's no, you better be in the top gear. You're at Daytona. Like, what other gears do you have?
right. But yeah, like in this one, there's a scene at Willow Springs where they have Miles yelling over at Gurney while they're racing. You know, it's like, you know how loud those cars are. I mean, like
Yeah.
but I don't know. I mean, but people who don't know racing, I think it kind of gave them a little visceral understanding of maybe
Mhm.
what went into it. And so I'm fine with that. I was a little disappointed that they didn't do a better job. So just generally with the story. So
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think probably racing scenes are really hard to shoot,
I agree.
honestly, and to make them, because if you think about it, you know, me and you can watch a race and see it pass and think that's, oh my gosh, that's, you know, it's crazy, but a lot of times it's really just someone slipping by someone, yeah,
Right.
you know, and sliding by, yeah.
No,
So
you're right.
so who tell me about some of the other people that are inside the book other than Miles and Shelby.
Well, so the triumvirate that really kind of ran Shelby, and for the entire really up until 1970 was Shelby was sort of the he was the frontline guy, he was the promotional guy, the business guy. Phil Remington did all the technical stuff.
Mhm.
His title, I don't, may have been engineer. He really was the hands-on guy
The
who
guy.
he was the guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think he was the single most important person after Shelby. And
Yeah.
then Al Dowd was a ex Coast Guard guy, and he kept the trains running on time. He did all the logistics, business. He was a
Mhm.
liaison with Ford's business people and the financial side. And those three were really those were the guys who really ran it. And Miles was sort of he was a driver. He was obviously an ace driver. He was also the chief development driver.
Mhm.
So for the Cobras, for the Ford GT, and he did the early work on the Mustang, the GT350. Um, but and again, he was killed in '66. So after that, well, his role changed quite a bit after that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but those are the most important ones. But then, I mean, there was a bunch of Carroll, Carroll Smith, the man who sort of invented sort of the modern position of race engineer. He was there.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, it had some really great mechanics were there. Charlie Agapew still around. Chuck Cantwell, he ran all the Mustang programs. He's still around and did a great job.
Mhm.
Ron Butler, top mechanic who also did copies of Cobras for many years. I mean, they had a real all-star cast there. I think I
Yeah.
quoted Ryan Falconer, who ended up running a pretty well-known racing motor shop for many years. I mean, he said at one point he thought they had the best mechanics in the United States who were working there at Shelby. It was just a really
Mhm.
impressive crew of people.
Yeah. You said another name, someone I like a lot is Carol Smith. And on a little plug, we sell his books still. Purchase them from his son, The Tune to Win, The Drive to Win, Engineers, Nuts and Bolts. And I might be missing one or two, but Carol Smith's books are great. I mean, his Nuts and Bolts books are one of those books I read and realized I was an idiot. You know, like I've been doing things wrong all along and
Right.
stuff. And yeah, so is Carol in the book, Carol Smith, a fair amount, or?
Yeah, he is. I think he was really important. He got involved when the Ford GTs came, when Shelby got the
Mhm.
Ford GT program, and he joined them right in '65, right at the beginning, right before they went to Daytona for the first race. And he was there to the end. I mean, he was, hardcore. Well, obviously a hardcore racer, and towards the end, I think Shelby lost interest in a lot of the racing stuff.
Mhm.
And Carol Smith, I mean, one of the things the books gets into is I mean, they did Can-Am briefly. That was really Carol Smith's doing, that is. They did Trans Am, obviously. He wanted to do Formula A, which is Formula 5000 is how we know it. So yeah, he was a really critical component of that, because the test program was something that never would have happened without his kind of
Yeah.
input.
So why you mentioned Shelby started losing interest in racing? What was behind that?
I think things they got too big. I mean, there's a pretty good quote in there about him saying that, there's too many suits running around here. I mean, originally it was this Cobra. It was this. They only made like 999 of them. I mean, it's like we
Mhm.
think of this. this car, the Cobra's so famous. Is not. I mean, there's probably more replicas out there than there
Oh,
are.
hands down. Yeah.
So we think of them as being a lot more out there, and so it didn't really mean much to Ford's bottom line. I mean, it was this little tiny footnote in there, probably their ledgers.
Mm-hmm.
But once they sort of got the Ford GT program, which was a multi-million-dollar program and a lot of prestige on the line, and then they did the GT350 program, then we're talking about thousands of cars being knocked out a year. There was more money involved. There was more risk to Ford. They wanted more involvement. They sent more people over there. It became more of I think, like a Fortune 500 style business rather than kind of a racing shop.
A bunch of guys building cars. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It was, you had to have a name card. You had security at the gate. There weren't people it wasn't like a hang where you could hang out and kibitz while you're building your car. So,
yeah.
And I think he got tired of that. And he was constantly, the GT350 became progressively less sports car like and more like a, luxury car. And I think he had less interest in it. The 427s weren't selling. The Mustangs weren't doing that great in Trans Am. His Trans Am program, the Can-Am program, it kind of fizzled.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he was just burned out. He'd been like hard at it for 20 years, and he sort of needed to reset, which he did. He came back and did all the Chrysler stuff.
Yeah.
But I think he'd had by the late 60s, he'd had enough. He just said no more.
Yeah, I get that. I've been selling automotive books for about 30 years now, and even I get burnt out on cars. I mean, several years ago, there was some time where I did not want to even go in my own garage to tinker with cars because I was doing so many car shows a year, and then always, selling car books and hearing every guy's car story. That for me, it burnt me out on cars for a bit. It's like I wanted to talk or read anything else, but then. Racing for me got me back into it. Like I started watching F1 again and everything. And that's what got me back, and just tinkering with my hands. I love working with my hands and stuff, but I do understand that you have this passion and you have it for a long time. And then after a while, it's probably you want new challenges. You want to, learn new topics and stuff like that. So I do get that getting burnt out for him and everything.
And I think also we forget, I mean, the 427 Cobra, which is now that's what everyone thinks of when they think of a Cobra, but it was really unsuccessful when it came out. It was they weren't able to homologate it, so it couldn't race internationally. So there's a really limited audience for club racing Cobra 427s, and the car didn't sell as a street car worth a damn. So they were just sitting there piling up, and so that, once they lost the Ford GT program, they were doing Trans Am and some other little stuff, but I mean, after you're winning Le Mans, I mean, to go to like a club track at, Mid-Ohio or something was not like a big deal. I don't think he was. I just think he'd been to the mountain and he didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, he'd already been to Everest once, didn't need to go back. Yeah.
I mean, especially like I remember I just did a thing recently with Lynn Park, Mr. Cobra as they call him, who's and Cobras were selling for like, you could buy a really nice 289 for like $3,000 in 1974 or something, because of the fuel crisis. And so I think it wasn't until, later on people really got into Cobras again. And I think Shelby, all of a sudden he took pride in that. And all of a sudden, they became the Shelby American Automobile Club. And there was a lot of stuff going on. And he, was a legend to those people, a real icon. So I think it's got him back into it.
When do you think he realized he was an icon? Because, he was a racer. I know people liked him for racing, and I knew people liked his cars back then, but I don't think he was quite the icon that he became later on. Do you think he enjoyed that, or do you think he realized that he was the icon that people thought he was?
Yeah, I think that, so one of the things I do for books like these is you end up reading a lot of the literature from the period, and this stuff was covered really well back in the 60s. There were a bunch of car magazines. They devoted a lot more space to racing than they do now. And it was a much bigger deal to that audience. Shelby was a star. I mean, he was a star because of racing, as a racing driver. I mean, winning Le Mans in 59. And I mean, he and Phil Hill were the two big dogs on the American racing scene, the road racing scene throughout the 50s. So yeah, he knew it. I mean, he played on it. I mean, he was really selling himself as much as anything else.
Yeah.
So I think he understood from the beginning who he was, and he definitely generated some income from that as well.
That's wild. Yeah, I often wonder about these guys that are become automotive icons if they really realize how, there's people like me that, I mean, I'm fairly young. I'm only 44 and still I have Shelby stuff on my walls,
Why is that?
like,
Why do you like the Shelby stuff?
I like curvy cars. I like the Cobra. Like I like curvy shaped cars.
Uh-huh.
I like the story of a man that was like, I'm gonna build my own car. Like I love that story. Whether it was the AC or whatever, he wanted to do something. It's kind of that American spirit. Oh, I want to do something, and so I'm just going to go out and do it. I think that's what I've always liked about them. And like I'm not the biggest Mustang, but I love the Shelby Mustangs.
Uh-huh.
There's just something about those Mustangs that just, I think for me as a kid, when you saw the regular car and then you saw the Shelby version, and you're like, wow, the Shelby version is so much cooler than the
Right.
regular car. I think those were the type of things that got me realizing what they were doing was different and everything
Mhm. Yeah.
and stuff.
But Shelby, I think he always understood. I mean, he knew he was a star from the beginning. I mean, the guy
Mhm.
who actually never really realized it was Phil Remington, who was like one of the most famous fabricators I think of ever, and he never quite understood how important a figure he was. I mean, so it was always
Yeah.
funny talking to him how humble he was. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. That's probably true. Yeah. So any other chapters you just want to mention in the book?
well, I mean, I'd spent a long time. So Le Mans '66, that's the famous or the infamous 1, 2, 3 finish.
Mm-hmm.
In the movie, obviously, Ford v Ferrari. So I spent a lot of time on that. I've got my own take on that, and so I think that one was pretty good. I actually had a lot of stuff that was brand new to me on the '66. Shelby went um, to Indianapolis with a turbine car, and that was a complete disaster. So this was
Yeah.
like a catastrophe because it was a cheater, which he didn't realize. I mean, he didn't know it was a cheater, but so that was a very that was material that I'd never seen before, and I was really eager to write about. So I like that, and but also the Trans Am stuff. I mean, usually when you think of the Trans Am Mustangs, everyone thinks of Bud Moore and Parnelli Jones, and
Mm-hmm.
actually, Shelby and Jerry Titus won the championship in '67, which a lot of people don't know, and it was
Yeah.
interesting writing about that stuff. I enjoyed that as well.
Yeah, my dad was a big Can-Am Trans Am fan, so I've watched a lot of the old races, and then we go to historical races, and those are always the Trans Am cars are always the cool ones to watch for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, yeah.
It's funny though, but that series, started in '66, and so I guess Parnelli wins. I think '70 is that when the Bud Moore Mustangs. But I mean, the cars, they were basically just like almost like street cars when they
Mhm.
started. I mean, they were sort of slightly modified Mustangs, and by the end of the '60s and early '70s, they were full on acid dip race cars. So
Yeah, yeah, and even later on when I was probably in my 20s and we were going as when Trans Am series was still running, I think, one of the things I didn't like about it is you realize several of the cars were different manufacturers but had the same chassis.
right, yeah, just
And then yeah, and after that, I was kind of like, meh, because I got to see Boris said racing in Charlotte, and
oh
I'm a Boris fan, and I remember asking he was talking about Hans Stuck, which was really cool and everything, but yeah, I think that kind of killed Trans Am for me when I realized they were all the same car, and I was like, that was the opposite of what the series was supposed to be. I mean, it wasn't it supposed to be for guys like me? Like I could literally go out and buy that car, and I could buy the parts on it and I could have a race car like the Trans Am cars. Wasn't that kind of how the series was meant to be?
yeah, and in fact, I think the first so '66, the first year, Shelby American, they built. I don't have the book in front of me, but I think they built 20 or 21 uh, Trans Am chassis. Well, it was Trans Am and it was a sedan and SECA club racing. It was either one that was eligible for, and they were built for customers. They weren't building them to race themselves. They ended up doing the last race of the season in '66 to secure the championship for Ford,
Mm-hmm.
and Titus drove one of the cars. But yeah, they were built strictly as customer cars.
Custom
And
cars, yeah.
in '67, they also built a bunch of customer cars. So yeah, you could. I mean, wouldn't have been cheap. I mean, but yeah, you could. It was type of racing you could do if you were an amateur and you wanted to like, your local track was Charlotte, and they came there. You could go race there at Charlotte.
Yeah.
Obviously, even back then, I mean, to go tow your car around the country is going to be an expensive proposition for.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
very expensive. Yeah.
yeah.
So, you've written several books. Can you rattle off some of the books that you've written?
I should know these. But well, I mean, the ones I'm most proud of are, so I did a book on the Scarabs, which is those are the all-American specials of the late 1950s. Lance Raventlow built, and they also built the first and last genuine all-American Formula One car in 1960. So I did a book on that, and also a book on, which I lamely have over here up my wall, the Ford GT book. And that's it's a little bit like the Shelby American book, and that it deals very specifically with the factory efforts. So it's only the factory stuff from 64 to 67. And but I've also co-written a couple of books with Matt Stone, the author. So we did a book on Paul Newman's racing career, and we did another one.
What was the title of that one?
Winning.
That is Winning. Okay, yeah.
In fact, the movie, which actually is not based on the book or anything, but I mean, it's the same title. Adam Carolla did a documentary, very nicely done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame because is your Scared book, that's out of print and gone these days, isn't it?
It's a collector's item at this
point. It is.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think Winning is going to be the same way.
Really?
Yeah, because they're getting harder and harder to get. Yeah. I've sold a ton of that Winning book, the Paul Newman one. Yeah, and it's interesting because we used to do a fair amount of car shows, and like the guys, Paul Newman, I love Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, and then I'd have the ladies come in and buy that book just because they love Paul Newman. And I was like, "Oh, you big race fan?" No, just a Paul Newman fan. I was like, "Good for you, good for you."
Yeah, I always think it's funny. People they're either McQueen or Newman. Who's better?
Yeah.
I think Newman was. I think he was the best of the celebrity drivers.
I think that's one thing for me being a little bit younger is like I can look up to both. Like to me, they're not competition because I didn't see them at the same time. They were just these automotive gods, kind of, and actors and all this stuff. So to me. Yeah, I've definitely looked up to both of them and love a lot of their movies and love going back and watching some of their classic racing and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you got to watch Le Mans, which I think is actually really almost unwatchable as a movie, but it's like great just for the racing.
Yeah, it was. Do you have any other books that you're going to be writing soon, or?
I don't have anything planned. I mean, it's a matter. I guess I should talk to Lee at the Octane and see if he's anything else. Honestly, when I got finished with this project, the Shelby American book, this book took so much of my time that I had to stop doing like my other freelance writing.
Yeah.
Just my deadlines. So now I'm just I'm getting back to doing just regular magazine stories, and I've been really busy just doing those. So
nice.
Kind of head down, making money again. So
yeah. So do you do social media, or like if you wanted somebody to send you stories or contact you, do you do that, or you're one of these guys that like to be left alone?
Well, I don't do social media just because I'm like a dinosaur. So I didn't get involved at the beginning, and then I kind of figured, hey, better just to stay away. I mean, I'm always looking for story ideas. I mean, yeah, email is how I do things. Just
okay.
Usually.
And just so for everyone knows, I will put some of your other books, like the Ford GT, behind you on our blog post so people can see some of your other books. The Scarab book, I don't think I've had in a long time. That I think when I did have it, it was gone, and I think I sold it for a pretty penny because like you said, they become collectible and everything. Yeah. I might have a few copies of the Winning left. I'm not even sure about that, but I'll put your other books down there for people to see and everything.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview, and I really, really appreciate the book. It's been a great seller. We can't even keep it on the shelf. I mean, the second we get them in, the blow it out. I usually have the book here in front of me to show off, and like I said, it's sold out. But we have way more coming in. There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Hey, Chad, I really appreciate having me on here. But again, like I said earlier, I mean, I just think it's so important to have, first of all, bookstores, or places that sell books, and to do car books and racing books. I mean, that's I really, really appreciate that. There's just not enough people doing that. So
yeah, no, that I appreciate that. I love car books. I love cars. I mean, it works out perfectly for me and everything. Well, I appreciate it, and I hope everybody enjoyed the interview. Take care.
Thanks. See you.
See ya.